Hello, Patreon backers. So this is the extended edition, I guess, the patrons Ask GN or whatever we're calling it. So for this one, as always, questions in the Discord, and it'll go in one of the two parts of Ask GN. We're starting to get a bit overrun with questions lately, so I'm having trouble answering the same percentage as previously, but bear with me. First one, Semtex2199. Steve, how did you found Gamers Nexus? Did you do it all by yourself? What were your thought processes when creating and dedicating yourself to a tech YouTube channel? How did it happen? I did not dedicate myself to a tech YouTube channel. I started a website in 2007-ish. I think it officially went live publicly like 2008, but I started 2007. The thought process was, I want to make a website, and then I did. So there wasn't a lot that went into it. I ran a clan website for years, for gaming clan, just for Age of Empires, Counter-Strike Source, things like that. Dawn of the Phoenix, it was called. That site was my first real website, and it was mostly a PHP nuke forum. And that site got hacked by just one of the bot hackers that used a known exploit to hack it. And I made some mistakes with the backups. This was a long time ago. And at the end of the day, basically the site was more or less not recoverable, and I decided to just start a new one. So I turned that one just into straight HTML, basically dropped it as a dynamic site, as when you referred to things as dynamic sites before they were all that, and made Gamers Nexus. And that started out basically as a forum. I used a new CMS for it. Started posting some news articles and game reviews and things like that. So that was all me. I brought in one of my friends, Martin Baker, who wrote like half of the game reviews in the early days. In the previous Ask GN, you'll see I was talking about how we started as a games coverage site. So Martin worked with me on basically all of that in the early days, and went off to be a game tester for Peter Molyneux, actually, for better or for worse. And let's see, beyond that, tech YouTube, I'm going to keep this short because it could obviously be quite long with 10 years of history, but tech YouTube didn't really get into seriously until a couple of years ago, I guess. We've had a YouTube channel since probably 2009 officially, but it was games coverage. It was like game trailer analysis. I do Greenlight Spotlight was a series I did where I'd pick a bunch of Steam Greenlight games and talk about the ones I thought were actually worth looking at. We did a Heat Signature series that was about indie games. Done like 50 interviews with the Star Citizen team, although that was once we started getting into hardware for the most part. So the YouTube channel, I wasn't too serious about at first. Like the website was always my core focus, and when neither of them are really generating any money worth even talking about, it didn't matter where the focus was. So I wanted to focus on writing, so that's what I focused on. YouTube was kind of a secondary, just occasionally uploaded stuff to go with it. And I started learning that doing things like a trailer analysis the day a trailer went live would get you a lot of views and would get you subscribers and things like that. And you start seeing the doors open from struggling for like 4 years to even get discovered with a website. You're posting to things like News for Gamers and posting to Reddit and getting banned from subreddits for self-promotion and things like that. Like, that's the hustle. That's what you have to do to get noticed, because you can produce the best content in the world. Doesn't matter. No one knows who you are. So good luck. So yeah, there was a lot of hustle of like just trying to get this content out there in front of people. And I learned, it took a little while, but I learned that YouTube had a great system for discovery where they'd push your content. If it's good enough, they'll push it in front of people. So it was more of a like, it feels like you have a little bit more control where, I shouldn't say that, you don't have much control with YouTube. It feels like you have more of a chance to get found with your content on YouTube, because if it's decent, then hopefully a couple views and some view velocity will get out in front of other people. Whereas with an article, you're relying entirely on SEO, which I did get good at one point, and did as a service at one point, and you're relying on aggregate sites like N4G and then TechSpy. Yeah, TechSpy I think was the other one I used. So yeah, thought process was my old site was hacked. I want to make a site, and then it turned into a gaming coverage site. And YouTube sort of came out of necessity, because you start realizing there's only so much money you can make from running a website. And by only so much, I mean like you cannot survive on running just a written article website unless you get pretty damn lucky, or you sell things like interstitial ads, which I didn't want to do. I have really harsh ad requirements that require them to not be invasive. That means you don't make as much money. So YouTube and video content emerged as a way to say like, okay, this is how I can get discovered. So I'm no longer like as underground. So I get found, and once they find me, I can push them to the website. And so hopefully I get some readers and some viewers. And then as views come into both of the two platforms, the website and YouTube, hopefully I can make this thing work financially. So that was the process, basically. It took several years to get there. A long time. Next question, BreakingDimes. What kills a CPU quicker, high voltages or high temperature? If you put a high enough voltage in, it kills the CPU instantly. So I would say high voltages. High temperatures don't really like outright kill the part if it's a CPU. High temperature can cause damage from if it's thermal cycling, like if it's rapid expansion and contraction. High temperature can cause issues with aging of thermal compound, but typically atop the IHS, not below it. It can cause issues with capacitor aging, but only if the capacitors are really hot as well, and they typically aren't. So really, the answer to your question is voltage. High voltage kills it. And ultimately, high voltage causes high temperature anyway. So one catalyzes the other. So yeah, voltage. Next question, FourthTuna. This kind of addresses the retrospective testing question of the last episode. Let's see. Do some tests... Oh, could you do some tests, architecture versus architecture, like Sandy Bridge versus Kaby Lake, same clocks, throw Devil's Canyon in, all of that. Maybe do a graph of FPS versus nanometer count. That doesn't really make sense, but I see where you're going with it though. Just curious what's in there. Some in-depth testing of an older and newer 8-thread. Yeah, so as you point out later on here, this might be a bad test since there's DDR4 versus 3 in most cases. So we did some of this. I think it was Haswell. I'm not sure. I think it was Haswell or Skylake, where one of the boards, one of those two products could have DDR4 or 3, and we got a board that had 2 DDR4 slots and 2 DDR3L slots, and so we were able to normalize for the memory and run DDR3 in multiple generations, including what was the newest at the time, because the board supported both. It was a BioStar board, I think. So you can kind of normalize for memory. What you're ultimately looking at is like an IPC test, which a lot of people do. Hard OCP's done a lot of them. Yeah, we've done architecture versus architecture stuff, mostly with GPUs. Like I did that with Vega versus the Fury. I tried to do it with Pascal and Maxwell, but I ran into a lot of issues that made the testing more or less invalid, because it was just, I had issues where things were incomparable. It's problematic. Like the biggest problem is that if other things change with the architecture, like the platform, you really have to be able to isolate those variables. And your best way of doing that is probably synthetics. So if you know the memory's changed, you have to use synthetics that don't really touch the memory, and people just don't really care about those. So you end up with a bunch of hypothetical numbers. I've done stuff like this, but we haven't done much of it with CPUs, is the answer to your question. I've done it with GPUs. You can look at our Vega versus Fury clock for clock content for that if you're curious. Some people do more of this testing than I do. I tend to focus on like, that's an academic exercise, and those are fun. If I have time, I do them, but most of the time we're focused on testing the product as a product that you would buy, and that doesn't involve downclocking it to old generation clocks and things like that. It involves mostly testing it for today's standards, for what people are buying today. Next one, gamertaboo. Do you ever get time off? I sort of realized you seem to be working every waking hour of the day. Basically comes down to, I feel bad you never get time to play a game, which seems like you must have liked to do at some point, being Gamers Nexus and all. Are you still a gamer? I would say yes. And I say yes because I put my time in. So as I said in the Discord chat, I did like 40 plus hours a week of gaming for years, basically, and like multiple thousands of hours in every type of game, in EverQuest, in test games, Counter-Strike, COD 4, like Age of Empires, I was competitive in. So like first rank worldwide ladder scoring in Age of Empires 3, not that anyone cared about that at the time. Was quite competitive in StarCraft, was competitive in CSS, played a lot of MMOs. So I've done my time. Before all that, played all the Nintendo games. I think I've probably got over 15,000 hours in games. Like if you sat down today and played games nonstop for 2 years, that would be the equivalent. So I don't play games really anymore other than studying them for work. And I probably get fewer than 5 hours a year for the most part of gaming. That's not considered work. So I would still say I'm a gamer though, because I still have that mentality. I put the time in, I understand every genre, and even though I don't play the new games, they're really not that different. Like I get it. It's newer graphics and the mechanics suck a little bit more. That's pretty much it. So, and there's loot boxes now. But no, yeah, I would say I definitely still identify with the mentality. And I still look at games and go like, yeah, I want to play that game. Like it actually looks really fun. I just don't have the time unless it's for work. Next one, Inks. Is there a testing reason or otherwise that tech channels don't typically test MMORPGs when doing benchmarks? So yes, this feeds off the previous question. Knowing the different genres, MMORPGs are basically not tested because there's so much variance. You're relying on, well, there's a few things. One, MMOs update constantly. So even when they have really good update logs, you don't know exactly what they've changed. Maybe they changed the graphic setting, so you're rerunning tests every time. That's insane. So that's an issue. Network latency is a big issue. Other players in the vicinity is an issue. Like, do you test in a city or somewhere where there's a lot of other players in a raid and dedicate like an hour of time for every test, every device? Or do you test somewhere more controllable where you get more consistent results? You're still worrying about network latency and updates, but more consistent results, but not necessarily that realistic to a user. So that gets into a question of, are we talking rankings of absolute FPS or rankings of relative FPS? If you're talking relative FPS, you could use an MMO and compare relative FPS between devices. People don't really seem to care about that though. They don't care about just percentage scaling. They care about how many frames does this card get in this game. And so if that's the case, you really need to test those more dynamic elements where it's impossible to control the scenario. You can't reasonably say that a card that did 98 FPS versus a card that did even 85 FPS are reasonably different. That sounds like quite a big range, but when you're talking about as much variance as in MMOs, it would be irresponsible without a lot of repeat testing and understanding the deviation run to run to call that difference meaningful, again, without just a ton of research. So they don't make good test cases. And also, to be fair, MMOs are typically not that stressing. So maybe you test it once when it launches if it's a big name with a really, like, I don't know, Star Citizen's kind of an MMO at this point. We'd probably test that. Maybe Vanguard back in the day when that was new. That was really high fidelity game, but you don't use it as a repeat test because it's just too hard. And it's not that people don't want to do the work, it's that you don't want to waste your time, which is what it would be for the most part. Last one, Pow Bam Zing says, with an influx of used GPUs potentially on the horizon, depending on the cryptocurrency market, is there software or a way to determine the amount of abuse a GPU has taken, such as hours like a hard drive would show, or thermal cycles? No, there's not. I've spoken with some vendors, though, when we were doing those how do vendors feel about mining pieces. Some of them talked about putting chips on the GPUs to determine if the GPU had been, or I should say the video card, had been used for effectively crypto mining for its whole life, so that they could then void the warranty. So that never really went through as far as I'm aware, and if it did, you certainly wouldn't have access to the data, sadly. But no, there's no good way to know. You could buy it, and you can open it up, take the shroud off, and look for bulging or ballooned capacitors. And if you see that, it's an indication that you should return it, if you even can. But short of that, there's no good way to know. Physical abuse is what you're looking for, but it's probably not going to show any signs of that other than capacitors that look like they might blow up, which would be from thermal cycling, as you suggested. So, oh, and bad fans, I guess. Take a look at the fans. Those are easy to replace, though, and they might have done it before they sent it to you. But yeah, there's no good answer. Sorry. I wish there were one. That's it for this time, though. Leave questions on the Discord, as always. And I guess I won't tell you to go to patreon.com because you're already there. So thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time.